They slammed her head into the wall. The sound was dull, wet, final. For a moment, the corridor froze, air thick with shock, the hum of the fluorescent light trembling above her like a pulse. She didn't fall immediately. Her body absorbed the hit, spine straightening as if her bones were arguing with gravity. When she did sink, it wasn't collapse. It was precision, a quiet descent into calculation. They thought she was out. She wasn't. Navy SEALs don't just black out. Now, before we show you what happens when they realize she was never out cold, hit that like button and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Because after this, nobody at that base will ever underestimate a Navy SEAL again. Her eyes stayed open, unfocused but aware, watching the boots shuffle backward, listening to their laughter echo down the metal hall. Every sound became data. The scrape of a sole, the rhythm of breath, the cadence of arrogance. Pain came late, like an afterthought, like something her body had decided could wait. She took it the way she'd been trained to take cold water, without permission, without noise. The floor was cold against her cheek, dust and iron. The taste of rust lingered on her tongue, but she didn't spit. She slowed her breathing instead, syncing it with the flicker of the light above, counting each pulse. The corridor was narrow, windowless, and the air smelled like oil and sweat, a place built to break people, but not her. When the door finally slammed shut at the end of the hall, she blinked once. Just once. It wasn't fatigue. It was acknowledgement, a silent timestamp. What happened here would not stay here. She let the silence settle around her like armor, her thoughts sharpening in the dark. And though her body stayed still, something in her had already started to move. Not rage, not fear, calculation. Before the wall, before the silence that followed it, there was the base, a place built on repetition and rank. Arya arrived without fanfare. No introductions, no bravado. She moved like someone who had already done the hard part somewhere else. Her presence was quiet, her precision louder than any speech. At first, that silence earned curiosity. Then it earned suspicion. They watched her during drills, how she timed her breathing, how her form stayed steady long after others started shaking. Some whispered that she was too calm, that her stillness was arrogance disguised as focus. Others saw it for what it was, control, the kind they couldn't fake. But control in a place built on hierarchy threatens people who need noise to feel powerful. The small things started first. A comment half-muttered during inspection. A shoulder check that was brushed off as an accident. Her commands ignored during a team exercise, the instructor pretending not to notice. Each moment slid past without reaction. She didn't correct them, didn't raise her voice. She logged them, quietly, methodically. Every slight was a line in a mental report she'd never file. Some of the men found her restraint unnerving. They expected defense or outrage or anything that would prove they'd gotten through the armor. But she gave them nothing. They didn't know that silence, in her world, wasn't surrender, it was surveillance. She didn't respond then. She memorized instead. The day of the confrontation began like any other. Sweat, noise, and the metallic stench of the locker bay. A joke thrown too far. A challenge wrapped in laughter. One of them reached out to block her path, the way a child tests a fence to see if it's electric. For the first time, she looked up. Not angry, not afraid, just deliberate. The air shifted. What they saw in her eyes wasn't defiance. It was a mirror, and in it, they caught the first glimpse of what was coming. The sound of impact was less like a crack and more like a deep, wet thud, flesh meeting concrete, echoing down the corridor in slow motion. The wall caught her like a machine, unfeeling and exact. Dust fell in thin ribbons from the ceiling as Arya's vision narrowed to a tunnel of light and metal. The first thing she registered wasn't pain. It was texture, the grit of the wall pressing into her skin, the faint burn of friction on her temple, the cold weight of her own breath. Blood had a metallic taste, almost clinical. She rolled it across her tongue like she was memorizing it. Her hearing sharpened even as her vision blurred. She could pick out voices, one deep and nervous, another laughing too loud, a third whispering something like she's out. She logged them in sequence. Left, right, center. Distance, 6 steps. Shoes scuffed, boots clean. Time, night cycle, 2100. She didn't move. Movement would make them check. Stillness made her invisible. The fan above kept spinning, its hum constant, marking the seconds she refused to lose. Her body felt detached, Her training taking over. Count, breathe, assess. Every sense became a record. The smell of oil and sweat. The drip of condensation hitting the floor. The pattern of retreating footsteps. They thought silence meant surrender. They'd never met someone who weaponized it. When the last echo of laughter disappeared into the corridor, she exhaled. It wasn't a groan or a gasp, just air releasing from precision. Her cheek slid slightly against the floor, her eyes still open. Light flickered once, twice, steady, and then she blinked. A single, deliberate motion, less reflex than message. Not over. She didn't reach for her head, didn't test the wound. Pain would come later. For now, the mission had begun, and she was its only witness. In the silence, she made her first decision. Remember everything. The medics cleared her for light duty within 48 hours. Concussion protocol, they called it. Rest, observation, hydration. She nodded at every order and ignored every one of them the moment the door closed. Rest was for recovery. She was preparing for something else entirely. When the base went quiet, when the hallways thinned out and the noise of boots faded, Arya stayed behind. The gym after hours had a different kind of silence. Not empty, just unobserved. The lights flickered like a heartbeat, steady but imperfect. She started small, body still bruised, wrists wrapped, breath controlled. One push-up became 5, 5 became 50. Each repetition wasn't about strength, it was about rhythm. Her breathing synced with motion, her thoughts narrowing to the count. Pain wasn't the enemy, distraction was. She trained until sweat blurred her vision, until salt burned the cut above her eyebrow. Every night, she added something new. Planks, pull-ups, weighted runs down the empty track. The sound of her boots striking concrete echoed like a metronome for patience. She wasn't chasing power. She was rebuilding alignment, mind, muscle, will. There was no music, no noise, just repetition. And somewhere between the 10th and the 100th push-up, her anger burned out and clarity took its place. A senior instructor found her one night, shadowed in the doorway. He watched her finish a set, her arms trembling but never stopping. He didn't interrupt. When she finally stood, he said nothing for a long time, then only one sentence. "You're recalibrating." She didn't answer, didn't need to. The acknowledgement was enough, proof that someone saw what others had missed. Word spread, not through gossip, but through observation. Trainees noticed the lights in the gym still on long after curfew. They started calling it the discipline hour. Her name traveled in whispers, not pity, not rumor, but something closer to respect. She didn't correct them, didn't confirm a thing. She just kept moving. What she was rebuilding couldn't be measured in reps or minutes. It was precision, the kind that makes hesitation disappear. By the end of the week, her bruises had faded but her eyes hadn't softened. The silence that once made her invisible had turned into presence. And every time she laced her boots, she reminded herself of one thing. They thought she broke. They were wrong. Weeks passed, and the bruises had vanished, but memory had not. Orders came down for a full-scale simulation, close-quarters combat, urban breach, live coordination. Same unit, same team, same faces. The names on the roster might as well have been a confession. Arya didn't flinch when she read them. She just tightened her gloves, adjusted the strap of her vest, and walked into the bay. The space was familiar, metal flooring, chalk outlines, target walls painted to look like an enemy compound. The same flickering fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the same hum that had marked her fall. But this time, the air felt heavier, expectant. Nobody made jokes. Nobody blocked her path. They moved around her like soldiers who'd learned what silence could do. When the signal sounded, she didn't rush. She flowed. Every movement was measured, deliberate, an execution of precision. While others shouted commands, she spoke through motion, a gesture, a glance, a tilt of the weapon. Her timing was surgical. Breach. Clear. Move. The first man broke formation under pressure, missing a step. The second hesitated when her voice cut through the calm. Calm. Exact. Final. Within minutes, the mock compound was secure, every objective completed. The officer observing at the far end scribbled something on his clipboard, but couldn't hide the small smile. No wasted motion, he muttered to himself. Arya didn't hear him. She was already stripping her gear, her breathing steady, her pulse normal. The others looked at her differently now, not because she had said anything, but because she hadn't needed to. When the drill ended, she walked the corridor again, the same one where it had happened. The light above her head flickered once, a perfect repetition. But this time, she didn't look up. She didn't need to. The symmetry was complete. Those who'd once laughed now watched in silence, realizing too late that what they mistook for weakness had only been control waiting for a reason to reveal itself. And as she passed them, the sound that followed wasn't laughter anymore. It was respect. The simulation bay emptied in silence. No debrief, no celebration. Just the low echo of boots retreating down steel corridors. Arya stood alone, helmet in hand, sweat drying along her jawline. For the first time since the wall, she allowed herself to breathe. Not relief, not pride, just equilibrium. Behind her, the men who had once mocked her lingered near the exit. None spoke. Their faces carried the kind of quiet that doesn't come from orders, but from realization. They had seen what control looked like under pressure, and it had dismantled them more thoroughly than any punishment ever could. A door opened. The senior SEAL, the same instructor who had once only said, "You're recalibrating," stepped inside. No speech, no applause, just a nod, a folded paper placed in her hand. New designation. Team lead. Authority earned not through noise, but through unbreakable precision. "You don't have to say anything," he said simply. "They already heard you." That night, Arya sat at her bunk with the logbook open. Around her, the base slept. The pages were filled with coordinates, drills, tactics, the language of a soldier who measured time in repetitions. She turned to the blank line beneath the day's entry and wrote 7 words. Control is louder than rage. Then she closed the book, slow and deliberate, like sealing a mission report. Outside, the training ground lights flickered against the concrete wall, the same wall that had once caught her head. But it no longer looked like an obstacle. It looked like a marker, proof that endurance can echo louder than impact. The camera would hold there, one soldier, one shadow, one truth that lingers after violence fades. Not all victories are seen. Some are written, quietly, in the margins of a logbook, by those who never needed to shout to be heard. Dawn crawled across the base in slow light, painting the metal walls gold. The night's silence lingered like a held breath. Somewhere in the distance, boots struck concrete, the rhythm of discipline continuing, unbroken. Over it, a voice rose, low and measured. "Sometimes," it said, "they expect you to break." The camera drifted over the training yard, the obstacle courses, the corridors that had witnessed everything. The voice continued, steady as the morning wind. Sometimes, silence terrifies them more than shouting ever could. Because silence doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't beg for fairness. It just waits and builds. The frame caught a last glimpse of Arya's logbook on the bench, the words still open to the final line. Then the screen faded to black. A pause. Then, softer. "What would you have done," the voice asked, "if it were you against the wall? Would you have waited or fought back?" No answer followed. Just the hum of the bass, the same sound that once filled the corridor before impact. Only now, it didn't sound cold. It sounded alive. The question hung in the air long after the final frame disappeared, not for guilt, but for recognition. Because every viewer carries a wall of their own. And somewhere inside, a part of them wonders, when the moment comes, will they remember to stay calm enough to win?